Good morning. I'm so impressed at how many of you guys got out in the rain today. It was really hard to get out of bed. How cool was that eclipse yesterday? I was not expecting a lot. I was like, this is going to be lame. All the kids are out of school. And it was really cool. I was really glad that my husband had us all go somewhere to see it rather than my yard or maybe even my couch, which was really my plan. Made me grateful that we parent differently and we are different people, which is really what we're talking about today. Marriage and parenting. So to start us off, I'm going to dive a bit into some overall goals of parenting, and then we'll look at how that plays out in our marriages as well. So I want you to take a look at a graph that I think I have. Literally, I sent Keri this last night. It was a piece of paper that she did so much better. I sent her like a Sharpie. I was like, "What? Can you make this look better?" Okay. So as you can see, this is the age of your child, okay? Across the bottom of this graph, it increases as they get older. Like as it goes to the right, obviously age increases as you get older, whatever. Okay. Then on the left is their independence. And so that is also, I didn't really show that, but like it increases as you go up. Okay, the independence increases as you go up the graph. I do want to apologize that this graph does not capture those of you with kids with special needs or unique medical conditions. I acknowledge that can't be this easily simplified, okay? But as you can see, when our kids are little, they need more help from us. So we start out like feeding them, clothing them, changing their diapers, and then we teach them how to feed themselves and clothe themselves and take themselves to the bathroom. And then eventually, as they get older, that independence increases. They're making themselves some food to eat, even if it's like a snack. And they're buying their own clothes. And I really couldn't think of how going to the bathroom like progresses, but it like continues. Okay, so you get the picture. So I don't know if you guys have ever heard that the goal of parenting is to work yourself out of a job. That's not really my point here. I'm not really sure I even agree with that, because I think most of us, to some extent, still value our parents' influence in our lives and would say that our relationship with our parents still affects us, whether positively or negatively. And for those of you who no longer have your parents in your life, I'm so sorry. And I'm sure that there are days and moments that you long for their input and presence in your life, because even as adults, we still have needs for good and bad that we look to our parents to meet. So I'm not saying that your job as a mother is done at 18. What I'm trying to show is that parenting is constantly changing. There's seasons that our kids need us a lot, and there's seasons that our kids need us less. And there's some seasons that they really need us, but really don't want us around. And all of that is normal. But we need to remember in parenting that the needs of our children change, specifically as they age. And we need to be willing to let our parenting change and grow too. These next few slides that I'm going to share actually come from some of what I learned in my own counseling through the Center for Relational Care based out of Atlanta. And that's that there are 4 needs that every child has: attention, affection, approval, and comfort. Attention asks the question, who enters my world in a way that is meaningful to me? Who really knows me? Affection asks the question, who shows me that they love me through meaningful, caring, non-sexual touch, such as hugs, kisses, holding. Who tells me that I love you? Approval asks the question, who is proud of me when I don't have to earn or deserve this? And then comfort asks the question, when I am hurting, who do I go to? Does this person respond to my pain with facts, advice, pep talks, criticism, or with genuine comfort? And here's what we have to keep in mind. It's the parent's job to meet the needs of the child, not the child's job to meet the needs of the parent. You could put all sorts of parenting decisions through that grid, which I do frequently. I encourage you to do that along with your spouse, to ask the question, does this decision that we're making meet our needs, or does it meet the needs of the child? Because you can have similar, it can look similar, but the motives are different. So let's look at these 4 needs through that grid. When we look at attention, we know that our children are constantly begging for our attention. And I'm not suggesting that we let them interrupt our conversation to get our attention or demand that they're always the center of attention. But it might mean that we stop scrolling long enough to hear them tell us a story or show us what they colored or built. It might mean becoming interested in the things that they're interested in. And it might mean helping our kids engage in the conversation and not always relegating them to the kids' table. When we look at affection, our kids need to know that we love them, even when they're not making good decisions. We need to be the ones telling our kids that we love them, even if they don't say it in return. When my strong, independent Sophie was 2 and 3 years old, every time that we told her, I love you, she would respond with, okay. For like over a year. And that was okay, because it's my responsibility to love her well. And it's an added bonus if she loves me in return. And she does now. When we look at approval, our kids want so desperately to know that we're proud of them. In the small things, in the big things, for no things, just for who they are. We need to both say and show our kids how proud we are of them, how much we like them. And then when we look at comfort, are we a safe space for our kids? Do they feel like they can be sad and mad around us? Or are there only certain emotions that are acceptable? Do we try to cheer them up when they're hurting? Or do we sit in the tears until they feel better? And the reality is that we will not fully satisfy all of these needs in any of our kids. And that's a bit disappointing, but it's also normal. And Keri said 2 weeks ago that it is good for your kids to be parented in different ways. And if you missed that talk, I really encourage you to go back and listen to it. You and your spouse having the same vision and values for your family is important, but you're still not going to parent the same because you have different strengths. So the goal is not to parent in the same way, but in the same direction. And one of the benefits of parenting alongside someone who parents differently than you do is that there's more of a chance that these 4 needs will be met in the lives of our children. regardless of how hard I try, I cannot fully meet the need for affection that my oldest has. She's 14, she's 6 inches taller than me, and she loves to give me a hug / hang on me for extended periods of time. And she always has. And I'll try to let go, and she'll say, I'm not done yet. And sometimes I'm like, I am. And some of y'all are thinking that I'm heartless and are baffled that I don't just stay there and enjoy it. And I try, okay? Obviously, y'all are the touchy people, and you clearly don't understand what it's like to not be touchy. I love Emma deeply, and I try to show her love in other ways, and I need to continue to grow in my selflessness, but I also need my husband to help meet this need in her life because it is a weakness for me, and I will never be able to satisfy it. The other day, I was supposed to go into work, but at 5:30 a.m. I got put on call because they didn't need me, which hasn't happened in years. And of course it was short-lived. I ended up getting called in around 2 o'clock, and at 3:23 p.m. I see a text from Stephen come through on my watch, and it says, Eliza, I'm so sorry. And okay, now the iPad at our house is connected to my iCloud account. So texts coming from the iPad look like they're from me. So I didn't see the text that was from me. So I scroll back on this text from Stephen and see that Eliza wrote, hey, did mom have to go to work? Because I'm at home and no one's here. Jen is at her house next door, but I could just do my chore and pack my lunch for tomorrow. Now, years ago, I used to manage the plans and meals for my kids on days that I worked. But now that our kids are older, and honestly, I'm a little bit less controlling, Stephen manages the kids and meals on the days that I work. And sometimes that means he drops the ball. And this used to make me mad. And I worried about how his actions affected our kids. But now I'm better at letting him pick up the balls he drops. Not in a bitter way, just in an understanding way. He didn't need me to intervene. And quite frankly, neither did Eliza. This 9-year-old, rode the bus home by herself because her sister that she usually rides the bus home with had a practice after school. She realized the front door was locked, went around the house, remembered the garage code and let herself in, thought, the house is empty, maybe mom got called in. She found the iPad, thought to find the iPad, and texted her dad. She had a plan. She knew Jen was there next door. She was okay to stay home by herself to get ready for the next day. Now, I'm not recommending that you let a 9-year-old fend for themselves, okay? Just to make it clear, we don't plan to do that again. But Eliza did a great job problem solving in what could have been a really scary situation, and we got to tell her that. And somehow she didn't feel forgotten. She felt confident and proud of herself. Nobody needed me to be mad or reprimand Stephen, nor did they need me to swoop in and save Eliza. Stephen and Eliza figured it out, and they were both okay. In her book, The Worry-Free Parent by Sissy Goff, which I highly recommend even if you don't consider yourself a worrier, I think just as parents, it's a really good read or listen. That's how I like to read with my ears. But she quotes Dan Allender saying, good parents get it right 50% of the time. That's encouraging. And it also means that those of us that feel like we grew up in a good home might still benefit from some self-reflection of approximately 50% of our issues. Because what's also true about these 4 needs is that they were not fully met for us as children. And that's how parenting begins to affect our marriages. Because a lot of the way that we parent is based on the way that we were parented. Parenting causes us to come face to face with our own childhood in ways that our previous life experience could not have revealed. And we're intentionally trying to recreate those moments in our childhood that we feel were good, and we are trying to rewrite the negative parts. And there's some parts of our parenting that we're not even aware what motivates our behavior. And this can easily cause conflict in marriage as you look at your spouse and think or say, is that what we're doing? Is this how we're going to parent? It's an interesting design that God had to take 2 people with different upbringings and try to have them raise children together. But trusting that the Creator knows what He's doing and knowing that He is sufficient to meet all of our needs, we can choose to lean into these spaces of our own childhood that we didn't know affected us. And this matters because we can't help our kids regulate their emotions, be emotionally mature, resolve conflict, be brave, if we actually don't know how to do these things ourselves. I have had an unrealistic fear of vomit for as long as I can remember. And I'm really sorry. It's hard for me to even talk about. I'm sorry if any of y'all have this fear, okay? I could blame it on my younger sister, who is always potentially car sick on all of our family trips. But it does seem to be a little deeper than that. I know I'm a nurse. That doesn't have to make sense. It makes even less sense that I could probably count on one hand the times that I have actually vomited. I can't even say it. Okay, the last time being on my honeymoon, which next month will be 20 years. Okay? That doesn't make sense. And I really hope I'm not jinxing myself by just speaking this out loud, because I don't do that normally. But I tell you this because you know who's also anxious about this? All of my children. And that is on me. Sissy Goff says that there's a well-known statement in the therapy world: we repeat what we don't repair. And I know that feels silly, that feels deeper to me, but that's a silly example. But I see that played out in my kids. Some of those 4 needs weren't met for me as a child. And that's not a failure on the part of my parents. That's human. But I have to put in the hard work to reflect on my own childhood and how that affects my parenting. And then I can give the same grace to my husband, who didn't have all of his childhood needs met, because it turns out his parents were human too. We're all in the process, in this process of growth. And that's often a good thing, even though it's sometimes painful. I encourage you to prioritize your husband, even when the demands as a mom seem all-consuming and more urgent. Ask about his day, even when you don't have any idea what happened in your own day. When Stephen was still teaching in the classroom, he would attend workshops in the summer for various things. And even though he taught 4th and 5th grade and taught all the subjects, he's always really loved history. So one summer when our kids were young, he took a week-long class on the War of 1812. Okay, so I didn't know there was a war in 1812. And I remember telling him when he got back, after parenting by myself all week so he could learn about the war, I said, I'd really like to hear about your week. But honestly, I was a little bored just hearing the title. Is there a way that you could give me a 5-minute summary so that I can stay engaged? because that is about all the bandwidth that I have right now. Now, I think that when this is said out of a place of love and not annoyance, it can actually be helpful and can allow you to be engaged while you're listening. Parenting, especially little people, can be exhausting. But marriage won't likely survive if it's put on the back burner until the kids are older. Because we don't want to be put on the back burner, do we? So I want to encourage you that your marriage matters now, not just in the future. A few weeks ago, I was at work and I had a very critically ill patient. I only had one patient, but I barely sat down at all during my 12-hour shift. And I had to change out a medication and its tubing, which is part of my job usually. It was one that was running continuously into the patient. And at this time, they were also going to change the patient's dosing weight, the rate of the med. It was multiple changes that required me to reprogram the pump. And whenever we have a high-risk medication, which this one was, we have to get another nurse to look at it. They check all the settings compared to the order, and then they sign off on it. So my neighbor nurse had been a nurse for maybe a year or two, and I asked her to double check my med, and as she was looking at it, she said, "Something isn't right." And she walked over to the computer and said, "Let me read this out loud to you." And so she proceeded to read out the order to me as I verified the numbers on the pump. And that's how we caught my error, in which I would have run the med at 10 times the amount that it should have been, which, had it actually reached the patient, would have been absolutely devastating. And I know that it's not just my patient, this is someone's child. And it was scary. And in that moment, I felt like I had 4 options. I could blow it off like it wasn't a big deal. It didn't even reach the patient, so it really wasn't that bad. I could feel so badly about myself that I couldn't even function the rest of my shift, and I still had 8 hours to go. I could justify that I had so many other things going on. How could they expect me not to make an error in that kind of a situation? Or, thankfully, what I chose to do, I could humbly thank my neighbor nurse for diligently checking my pump and acknowledge that I needed her. And I was so grateful that she didn't assume I programmed it right simply because I've been a nurse longer, and I usually do get it right. And I tell you that because we are not going to get things right in parenting. We are going to make big mistakes that are potentially devastating. And our husband is going to make mistakes. We are all humans that were parented by humans, and somehow we're now supposed to be parenting humans. There is so much room for error, and we need so much more room for grace. John 1:16 says, "For from his," speaking of Christ, "fullness, we have all received grace upon grace." As moms, we can humbly recognize that we don't always get it right. We've always needed Jesus, and we are desperately needing his grace that is poured out lavishly on us. And isn't this the gospel? That we can never do enough, but he is enough. Jesus pours out his grace on us, and we in turn can pour out grace to those around us, our kids, our husbands. And the good news is that there's always more grace. So as we close out today, and as I close out my time with you this Bloom year. It's just been a gift to get to share this motherhood journey with you. And my prayer is that you see Jesus more clearly. And more than any book, podcast, sermon, Bloom Talk, my hope is that you listen to the Holy Spirit at work inside you. And so I want to close us out with a prayer that I want to read over you. That is a prayer for hearing God. Oh God, let us hear you. In the hot, salty tears of an upset toddler, and in the deafening door slam of a frustrated teen, help us listen, Lord, for our lives are loud, and parenting is overwhelming. We can barely hear ourselves think, let alone process the latest headline. Oh God, let us hear you with a willingness to understand instead of demands to be understood. Help us listen, Lord, to the hurting in our families and friends and in our neighbors and nations too. Oh God, let us hear you. Help us be brave enough to get quiet, to sit with the hidden corners of our own hearts. Lord, we post and shout, demanding to be heard because we're too afraid of what we'll hear if we stop. Oh God, let us hear you in the cries of our children and the cries of our neighbors. Help us to stop talking so we may hear what you have to tell us through the heartbeat of another. Oh God, let us hear you. Amen.